The contraction hit at 4:47 in the morning and I grabbed the edge of the bathroom sink and breathed through it the way the instructor at the birthing class had demonstrated, slow and controlled, like the pain was something you could negotiate with if you just stayed calm enough. Marcus was already up. I could hear him in the kitchen, the specific sounds of a man who had somewhere to be, keys on the counter, cabinet closing, the particular silence of someone not asking if you need anything. I straightened up. Looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. 31 years old. 9 months pregnant. Hair tangled. Wearing the oversized sleep shirt Marcus had brought home from a conference 2 years ago that I'd kept because it was soft and because when you're 9 months pregnant comfort wins every argument. Another contraction. Stronger. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach and thought, okay. Today is the day. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known standing in that bathroom at 4:47 in the morning, was that by the time this day was over, I would have delivered my daughter, lost my home, and already filed the paperwork that would change everything. Not in that order. But close. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because you need to understand how I got here. You need to understand the kind of patient, deliberate, quietly devastating preparation that goes into a moment like that. And you need to understand a woman named Roberta Voss. My name is Nadia Calloway. I grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, in a house that was always slightly too cold in winter and slightly too warm in summer and completely full of love in every season. My parents ran a small accounting firm out of a converted garage. My mother handled the clients. My father handled the math. They were the kind of partnership that works because both people understand exactly what they're contributing. I grew up watching that. I think it shaped something fundamental in me, the belief that a partnership is only as strong as its honest accounting. I was 26 when I met Daniel Voss at a mutual friend's dinner party in Charleston. He was 30, an engineer with a structural consulting firm, funny in the specific way of people who are actually intelligent rather than just performing it. We talked for 4 hours. He walked me to my car. He texted before I'd reached my apartment. We dated for a year and a half. I met his mother, Roberta, at Thanksgiving. I want to be precise here, because precision matters for what comes later. Roberta Voss was 64 years old when I met her. She was a retired office manager, widowed at 58, living alone in the house she and Daniel's father had owned in Morgantown for 31 years. She had silver hair she kept in a careful bob. She wore coordinated separates the way some women wear armor. She had the particular social skill of making you feel welcomed and assessed at the same time, like a hotel concierge who was also running a background check. She was perfectly pleasant to me that first Thanksgiving. She was perfectly pleasant to me for approximately 6 more months. Then Daniel proposed, a quiet evening, my favorite restaurant, the ring his grandmother had left him, and something in Roberta shifted. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a temperature drops before a storm. Subtle enough that I kept explaining it away. Telling myself I was misreading things. Telling myself she was just protective. Telling myself it would get better once she got to know me. I kept telling myself that right up until the day she handed me an eviction notice while I was in active labor. But we'll get there. Daniel and I got married on a Saturday in April, 18 months after we met. Small ceremony, 80 guests, outdoor venue with string lights and a jazz quartet. It was genuinely beautiful. Roberta sat in the front row in a lavender dress and cried, which I chose to interpret as happiness. We bought a house 3 months later. This is where the story gets complicated, so I need you to follow closely. The house was on Birchwood Lane, a 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, a kitchen that had been recently updated, and a backyard that backed up to a small creek. It was exactly the kind of house I'd been keeping a quiet mental folder on since I was old enough to understand that houses could be aspirational. The purchase price was $340,000. Daniel contributed $110,000 from savings he'd accumulated over 7 years of engineering work. I contributed $85,000, money I'd saved from 6 years working as a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Charleston, supplemented by a modest inheritance from my grandfather. The remaining $145,000 was financed through a conventional mortgage. Both of our names went on the deed. Both of our names went on the mortgage. Standard, clean, documented. Roberta contributed nothing financially. I want to be very clear about that. Not because money is the point, it isn't, but because of what came later. Because of the story Roberta started telling, quietly and persistently, to Daniel and to herself and eventually to anyone who would listen, that this was Daniel's house. That he had built it. That it was his family's legacy. That my name on the deed was a technicality rather than a fact. She started calling it the Voss property. I started keeping records. The first year of marriage was genuinely good. Daniel was a devoted partner. He cooked badly and enthusiastically. He remembered small things, the coffee order, the name of my difficult client, the anniversary of my grandfather's passing. He was present in the way that matters. Roberta visited once a month. At first her visits felt supportive. She'd bring food, help with yard work, sit with us on the porch in the evenings. Normal mother-in-law behavior. But there were things underneath the normality that I kept filing away. The way she'd rearrange items in my kitchen when she thought I wasn't watching, then act surprised when I noticed. "Oh, I just thought it made more sense this way, honey." The way she'd reference decisions Daniel and I had made together as decisions Daniel had made, editing me out of the narrative mid-sentence. Daniel chose such a nice neighborhood. Daniel has such good instincts about the house. The way she'd look at my professional life, I'd moved to a senior paralegal position at a larger firm, higher responsibility, better pay, with a particular kind of polite dismissiveness. "Such a busy schedule for a married woman," she said once, with a smile that made the words sound like a compliment. I smiled back. I kept working. I kept saving. When I got pregnant in our second year of marriage, I was genuinely happy. Daniel was over the moon. We told people at 12 weeks and Roberta cried again, more than at the wedding this time, which I noted and chose to read generously. What I didn't know yet was that the pregnancy had triggered something specific in Roberta. A calculation. A decision about what the future should look like and what role, if any, I had in it. I found out gradually, the way you find out most things that matter. It started with the room. We had a guest bedroom that Roberta used on her visits. When we announced the pregnancy, Daniel and I began discussing converting it to a nursery. Obvious, natural, necessary. We looked at cribs and paint colors and furniture configurations. We had a plan. Roberta arrived for a visit in my 5th month and announced, with the tone of someone confirming rather than proposing, that she'd been thinking she should move closer. Possibly into the house. Temporarily, to help with the baby. "There's plenty of room," she said. "The guest room is sitting empty most of the time." "We're converting it to the nursery," I said. "Well," she said, and smiled. "We can figure that out." The next day she called Daniel while he was at work. I know this because he told me about it that evening, gently, carefully, in the way he talked about his mother when he already knew he was going to need to navigate something. "She mentioned the guest room," he said. "We're making it the nursery, Daniel." "I know. I told her that." She's just," he paused. "She's excited. She wants to be helpful. She can be helpful from Morgantown." He didn't push it. But I saw something in his expression that I filed away alongside all the other things I was filing. He was a good man. He was also his mother's son. And those two facts were beginning to occupy the same space in a way that was going to require resolution eventually. I accelerated my documentation. Here's what I mean when I say I kept records. I am a paralegal. I have spent 6 years being the person who understands that everything important in life is ultimately a document, a contract, a filing, a dated and signed piece of paper that says what actually happened regardless of what anyone remembers or prefers. I have seen more than enough cases to know that the people who end up protected are the people who treated their lives like legal matters before they became legal matters. So when Roberta's behavior started shifting from uncomfortable to concerning, I began keeping a written log. Not dramatic. Not adversarial. Just dated entries describing what had been said and done and by whom. Conversations. Incidents. Patterns. I created a folder on an encrypted drive. I kept printed copies at my office, in my locked desk drawer. I emailed summaries to myself periodically so there'd be a timestamp record. I also quietly consulted one of the senior attorneys at my firm, a woman named Patricia Greer who had practiced family and property law for 22 years and who had the specific gift of being able to tell you something alarming in a tone that made you feel prepared rather than panicked. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. I told her enough. She told me to make sure my name was clearly and unambiguously on every document related to the house. She told me to understand my state's property laws. She told me that if I ever felt my interests were being actively threatened, to call her before doing anything else. I saved her number under P. Greer, work contact. It was in my phone the morning my labor started. Before I go any further, if this story is landing somewhere real for you, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I see every single one and I am so grateful you're here. Now let's get back to it. My 7th month of pregnancy. Roberta arrived for what was supposed to be a 4-day visit. She stayed 11 days. This was not entirely unusual, her visits had a tendency to expand beyond their stated parameters, but the 11th day was the first time she said something I couldn't file away as ambiguous. Daniel was at work. I was working from home, feet elevated, laptop on a pillow, getting through contract reviews at a pace that made me feel slightly heroic. Roberta came into the living room and sat down across from me with the deliberate energy of someone who had been building to something. "I've been thinking," she said. "Okay," I said. I saved my document. "About the house." "About after the baby comes." I waited. "Daniel works long hours. You'll be recovering. A new baby is so demanding." She folded her hands in her lap. "I really think the best thing would be for me to come and stay. For the first few months at least. Just to help." "That's kind of you, Roberta. We'll figure out a system that works." "I'm not talking about visiting." She looked at me steadily. "I mean staying. Moving in. At least temporarily. The guest room. Is the nursery. The nursery could be set up in the master bedroom for the first months. Lots of parents do that, Roberta." I closed my laptop. "Daniel and I haven't discussed this." "I've spoken with Daniel." Pause. "I see. He thinks it makes sense," she said. "He's worried about you managing." I looked at this woman sitting across from me in my living room with her coordinated separates and her careful silver hair and her absolute certainty that the world should organize itself according to her preferences, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger. Something colder and more useful than anger. "I'll talk to Daniel tonight," I said. "Of course." She smiled. "I just want what's best for everyone." I waited until she left the room. Then I opened my phone and sent Patricia Greer a message. "Can we schedule a call this week? I have some things I'd like your input on." She responded within the hour. We spoke that Friday. The conversation with Daniel that night was not our worst, but it was a turning point. He'd agreed, without consulting me, to consider his mother moving in after the baby was born. He framed it as preliminary, exploratory, not a final decision. He used the word temporary 4 times, which is the conversational equivalent of building a house on sand and calling it a foundation. I did not yell. "I want to be precise about this because it matters." I told him clearly that any decision about who lived in our home required both of us. That I loved his mother's desire to be involved. That there were many ways she could be involved that didn't include occupying space in our house for an indefinite period. That I was 30 years old, educated, professionally capable, and growing a human being inside my body, not failing at a task I needed rescuing from. He heard me. He apologized. He said he should have talked to me first. and then, slowly, over the following weeks, the temperature dropped again. Not dramatically. Gradually. Roberta's calls to Daniel increased in frequency. His responses at dinner became slightly shorter. He started referring to things as we need to figure out when he used to say let's decide together. The ground was shifting and I was the only one who seemed to feel it. I had a second call with Patricia Greer. This one was longer. More specific. She walked me through something I'd been circling but hadn't fully articulated yet. You understand, she said, that under current state law, both your names are on that deed, and both of you have equal ownership rights. No third party, not a family member, not a friend, not anyone, has any legal authority to make decisions about that property without both owners' consent. I understand that, I said. What I want you to also understand, she said, is that emotional pressure and legal reality are two very different things, and that sometimes people confuse prolonged emotional pressure for legal reality. Your job is not to confuse those two things. My job is not to confuse those two things, I repeated. Exactly, she said. And if you ever feel that line is being crossed, if anything moves from emotional pressure to something that affects your legal standing, you call me and we file before anything else happens. I kept that sentence in the front of my mind like a compass heading. My 8th month. Roberta arrived again, this time without a specified departure date. She'd given her explanation to Daniel, who had given a gentler version of it to me. She wanted to be nearby as the due date approached. In case she was needed. The guest room, our guest room, the room we had not yet converted because the nursery furniture had been delayed by 6 weeks and we were managing, became her room. Her toiletries in the guest bathroom. Her schedule overlaid on the rhythm of our household. I was 32 weeks pregnant and running out of patience for the version of myself that kept finding generous interpretations. The incident that changed my internal framework happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I came home from my last in-office day before my remote leave began to find Roberta on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't hear me come in. She was talking to someone, a friend, I gathered, from the conversational tone, and she was discussing the house. Daniel's built something really solid here. Good bones, good neighborhood. Once things settle down it'll be perfect for the family. A pause. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Daniel needs to be the one making the decisions here. He's always been too accommodating. His father was the same way. Another pause. I'm working on it. It just takes time. I stood in the hallway for one complete breath. Then I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and called Patricia Greer. I think we need to move, I said. Not reactively. Proactively. I want to understand every option I have before something happens rather than after. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. I told her. What followed over the next 3 weeks was the most methodical thing I have ever done, and I have spent 6 years as a paralegal doing methodical things. Patricia and I worked through every dimension of my situation. Property rights, fully established, clearly documented. Marital assets, clean and accounted for. My financial contributions to the purchase, documented and traceable. And then she told me about something I hadn't thought to consider. Have you looked at the deed recently? She asked. The specific language around right of survivorship and co-tenancy? I had. I told her what I remembered. There's something else worth considering, she said. A partition action. I knew what that was from my work, but I let her explain it fully. A partition action is a legal filing that, in cases of co-owned property where the co-owners cannot agree on use or management, asks the court to either divide the property or order a sale with proceeds distributed according to ownership shares. It's a significant tool. It's not something you file casually. It's something you file when you need the court to establish clearly and publicly that you are a legal co-owner with equal standing, and that no third party's preferences can override that fact. I'm not suggesting you want to sell your home, Patricia said. I'm suggesting that filing a partition action creates a legal record that is unambiguous, that protects your interests formally, and that would make any attempt to pressure or manipulate you around the property extremely visible to a court. Even if I never pursue it to completion. The filing itself is the statement, she said. It says, I am here. I have standing. I am not going to be managed out of my own property. I was 34 weeks pregnant when we filed. I told no one. Not Daniel, not my mother, not my closest friend. Not yet. The filing was a document. It existed in a county records office. It would be there when it needed to be there. I went home that evening and made dinner and watched a documentary with Daniel and went to bed. And I waited. My due date was a Thursday. My labor started on a Monday. The contraction at 4:47 in the morning was the third one of the night, but the first that felt like a statement rather than a question. I stood at the bathroom sink and breathed and calculated and decided we needed to go to the hospital. Daniel was already dressed by the time I came out. He'd heard me moving, had read the situation with the accuracy of a man paying attention. He had my bag at the door. He had his keys. He had the particular focused calm of someone who is frightened but refusing to be unhelpful. Okay, he said. Let's go. I stopped at the kitchen counter on the way out. Picked up my phone. Pulled up Patricia Greer's number. Sent her a text that said simply, it's today. I'll be at Mercy General. Keep your phone on. She responded in 30 seconds, I'll be available. Call me if anything happens. I didn't know yet what anything would look like. But I'd been a paralegal long enough to know that the people caught off guard are almost always the people who didn't send the text. We drove to the hospital in the early morning dark, the city still mostly sleeping, traffic lights cycling through their colors for an empty audience. Daniel held my hand at every red light. I breathed through 2 contractions in the car. By the time we reached the hospital entrance, I was absolutely certain this was happening. Labor is a specific kind of time. It doesn't move the way regular time moves. It compresses and expands according to its own physics, and the hours inside it don't stack the way hours normally do. I will tell you the medically relevant summary. Lily Voss Calloway was born at 3:22 in the afternoon, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and an expression of profound offended outrage at the general situation that I found instantly relatable. She was perfect. I held her against my chest in the recovery room and felt something realign inside me, something fundamental and quiet, the way tectonic plates shift, not violently, just permanently. Daniel was crying. He didn't try to hide it. He sat on the edge of the recovery bed and held my hand and looked at his daughter and cried like a man who had just understood something he'd only known intellectually before. For about 40 minutes, everything was exactly right. Roberta had been at the hospital since noon. She had positioned herself in the waiting room with the strategic patience of someone who had been waiting for this particular moment for a long time. When Daniel went out to tell her the news, I heard her voice from down the corridor, a high, bright, this is my moment sound. She held her granddaughter and for a moment she looked like a person rather than an agenda. Then she handed Lily back to the nurse and turned to Daniel and said, I need to talk to you. Outside. Daniel looked at me. I nodded. Go. They were gone for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. When Daniel came back he looked like a man who had been told something he didn't know how to carry. He sat down beside me and took a long breath and said, My mother wants to move in. Formally. She says she's already arranged to rent out her house in Morgantown. I looked at him. She says she's talked to some people and she believes legally she can stay as a family member of the homeowner and Daniel. He stopped. She rented out her house? She's been planning this for a while. She's been planning to move into our home without our agreement and she rented out her own house too. Nadia. His voice was quiet and pained. She just had an idea about what would be best. Call her in here. What? Ask her to come back in. He went to get her. I picked up my phone. Pulled up my texts to Patricia Greer. Sent one that said, it's happening. She's moving in without consent. Please be ready. The response was immediate, already on it. You know what to do. Roberta came back in with the composure of a woman who had decided the outcome already. She sat in the chair beside the bed with her hands folded and her expression arranged into something she probably thought looked like loving concern. Nadia, she said. I know this is a big moment. And I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. But I've been thinking about this for a long time and I really believe. Roberta. I kept my voice even. I had practiced this voice. I had been practicing it for months. Are you telling me you've made arrangements to move into our house without speaking to me? I spoke with Daniel. Without speaking to me. She blinked. You're Daniel's wife, not the landlord, Nadia. This is his family home. It is our home. My name is on the deed. My money paid for part of it. My name is on the mortgage. I am not a guest in that house, Roberta. I am a legal co-owner. Her expression shifted. The composure frayed at one edge. Family doesn't talk about homes in legal terms. I'm a paralegal, I said. I talk about everything in legal terms. Daniel, she looked at him. That specific look. The one that said, fix this. Override her. Be your mother's son. And Daniel looked back at her. And then he looked at me. And he made a choice. Mom, he said quietly. This is Nadia's home. You should have talked to both of us. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a woman who had run a play she'd been rehearsing for months and had just watched it fail. I see, Roberta said. Her voice had gone flat. The loving concern expression was gone. What replaced it was something rawer and less managed. So that's how it is. That's how it is, I said. She stood up. Picked up her bag. Looked at me with the particular fury of someone who has confused their preferences for their rights for so long that having the distinction pointed out feels like an attack. You're going to regret this, she said. Quietly. Almost pleasantly. The kind of tone that is not a tone at all but a decision. She walked out. I lay back against the hospital pillow and breathed. Daniel sat very still. Nadia, he said. I'm sorry. I know. She's going to. I know what she's going to do. He looked at me. What do you mean? I picked up my phone and showed him the last message from Patricia Greer. His face changed as he read it. You filed, he said. I filed. When? 3 weeks ago. He sat with that for a long moment. What does it mean? He asked. It means that if she attempts anything at all regarding that property, there is already a legal record establishing my standing. It means any action she takes to interfere with my ownership rights creates a paper trail that starts with her being in the wrong. I paused. It means she already lost. She just doesn't know it yet. Here's what Roberta did in the 48 hours after she left that hospital room. She drove to our house on Birchwood Lane. She had a key. Daniel had given her one during her extended stay, which we had not yet reclaimed. She let herself in. She began, and I want you to understand that I have documentation of all of this, photographs and timestamps. She began moving her belongings into the guest room. Formally. Boxes. Clothes on hangers. The particular infrastructure of someone establishing residence rather than visiting. Then she called a locksmith. She called a locksmith to our home while we were still at the hospital and asked him to rekey the front door lock. The locksmith, a man named Gary, who becomes briefly important to this story, asked her if she was the homeowner. I'm the owner's mother, she said. Gary, bless him, said he'd need to verify ownership before rekeying, and asked for documentation. Roberta told him it wasn't necessary and that she was the grandmother of the baby who had just been born and that she was simply preparing the house. Gary said he understood, but he still needed documentation of ownership. Roberta did not have documentation of ownership. Gary declined to rekey the lock and left. Roberta then called Daniel. Daniel was sitting beside me in the recovery room holding Lily, and he looked at his phone screen and looked at me, and I said quietly, "Speaker." He put it on speaker. Simply trying to get the house ready, and this man won't listen to me. "Mom." Daniel's voice. "What are you doing at the house?" "I'm getting settled. I'm going to be there when you bring the baby home." "We didn't agree to that." "Daniel, you can't let her." "Mom." Quietly. Firmly. "You are not going to rekey our door. You need to leave the house." "I am not." "Mom." He looked at me. I nodded. "I need you to leave the house now. Nadia has already filed a legal action that establishes her property rights. If you attempt anything else, you're going to be creating evidence against yourself in an active legal matter." The silence on the other end of the phone had a texture to it. "She filed." Roberta's voice had changed completely. The composure, the management, the careful social navigation, all of it gone. What was left was the sound of someone who had been absolutely certain they held all the cards and had just been shown the deck. "She had no right." "She has every right," Daniel said. "She is a co-owner. She has been this whole time. This is your family's home. This is our home. Mine and Nadia's." A pause. "Please leave, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow." He ended the call. We sat in the recovery room in the particular silence of a marriage that has just passed through something significant together. Lily made the small sound she made when she wanted to be held, and Daniel picked her up without being asked and held her against his chest, and I watched him and thought, okay. This is the person he's choosing to be. Roberta left the house. Gary the locksmith confirmed this to us, unprompted, when Daniel called to thank him for his judgment. Apparently she'd sat in her car in the driveway for 20 minutes before driving away. She drove back to Morgantown. The renters she'd arranged for her house had not yet moved in. The arrangement had been informal, premature, the overconfidence of someone who was certain her plan would work. She called them and said there had been a change. She was in her house that night. I want to tell you about the 2 weeks after we brought Lily home, because I think this part matters. Daniel and I had a long conversation when we were finally alone in our own bedroom, the baby in the bassinet, the house quiet. He told me that he'd known for a while that his mother's behavior had gone beyond protective into something else. That he'd been making excuses for it and asking me to absorb it in ways that weren't fair. That he was sorry for the specific moments when I'd needed him to push back and he'd been too compromised by his own history with her to do it. I listened. Then I told him what I needed going forward. Not a list of demands. A clear statement of terms for a functional partnership, that decisions about our home were made by both of us, that his mother's preferences were not a deciding factor in our household, and that if he felt caught between us, I needed him to say that to me directly rather than trying to manage it from the middle. He agreed. And then, this is the part that mattered, he demonstrated it. Not with a speech. With consistent behavior over the following weeks. He returned his mother's calls but kept them brief. He was honest with her about the limits of what she could expect. He told her directly, in a conversation I was not present for but that he described to me in full, that the partition filing would remain on record and that any attempt to interfere with the property would result in us pursuing it. She pushed back. She cried. She told him he was being manipulated. He told her he was being a husband. Patricia Greer and I met in person 6 weeks after Lily was born. I drove to her office with the baby in the carrier on my chest, which Patricia regarded with the expression of a woman who has seen everything and found this particular combination mildly entertaining. "You can withdraw the partition filing," she said. "If the situation is stable and you feel your position is secure." "Not yet," I said. She nodded. "How long?" "Until I'm confident it's not needed." "That's a reasonable position." We left it on record for another 4 months. By then Daniel had had several more direct conversations with Roberta. The contours of a new relationship with her, more bounded, more honest, less organized around her preferences, were beginning to take shape. It was not warm. But it was clear. I withdrew the filing on a Tuesday afternoon while Lily was napping. Sent Patricia a message. Archived my documentation folder, clearly labeled and dated, but no longer the first thing I thought about when I woke up. I want to tell you what Roberta did when she found out I'd withdrawn the filing. She called Daniel. She said she thought it showed maturity. She said she hoped Nadia and she could start fresh. She said she'd been thinking about her behavior and she understood she'd overstepped. I was in the kitchen when Daniel told me this. Lily was in the bouncy seat on the counter, studying the ceiling fan with the intense focus of someone conducting important research. "What do you think?" Daniel asked. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my husband. I looked at the walls of the kitchen in the house that was unambiguously mine, the house where my name was on every document that mattered. I think, I said carefully, that people are capable of change when they experience real consequences. I picked up Lily, who immediately grabbed my hair with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered a perfect tool. And I think we can have a civil relationship with her. On our terms. On our terms, Daniel agreed. And she never gets a key again. Absolutely not. Lily is 8 months old now. She has her father's eyes and my grandmother's stubbornness and an opinion about everything that she expresses with a directness I find deeply encouraging. Roberta visits once every 6 weeks. She calls before she comes. She stays in a hotel in town because we told her early on that overnight stays in the house required both of our agreement and that we'd need more time before we were there. She brought Lily a stuffed elephant last month and sat in the backyard in the afternoon sunshine and held her granddaughter with a care that seemed, for the first time, uncalculated. I watched from the kitchen window and thought, maybe. Maybe is not forgiveness. Maybe is not trust. Maybe is not the relationship I might have wanted with a mother-in-law under different circumstances. But maybe is a beginning. I'm 31 years old. I have a daughter. I have a home with my name on the deed and my money in the walls and my choices in the paint colors. I have a husband who, when the test came, passed it. And I have documentation. Clearly labeled, properly archived, safely stored. My grandmother Frances used to say, "Hope for the best, document the rest." She was the wisest person I've ever known. I was a woman standing at a sink at 4:47 in the morning, 9 months pregnant, holding on through a contraction and thinking, today is the day. I was right about that. I just didn't know yet all the things that day would contain. But I'd already filed the paperwork. And that made all the difference. Thank you. Thank you for staying with me through every minute of this story. If any part of this reached you, if it felt familiar, or gave you something to hold on to, or made you feel a little less alone in whatever you're navigating, then it was worth telling. More stories are already waiting for you on this screen. Click one, and I'll meet you there.